Good morning. Exodus 14 is where we are at this morning. Starting a new chapter, so if you've got your Bible, you can open up there and follow along. Good to see all of you. Glad that you're here. Glad that you are at least somewhat awake. Exodus 14 is where we are at in our study of Exodus. And I have been in ministry for a lot of years, been in a lot of different situations and things. One of my favorite places to visit, to go on youth trips, to take guys. I've taken girl students also once, because it's normally about the dudes, man, the bros. But anyways, one of the places that I like to go is Joshua Tree National Park. And we go and we do what we call bouldering. So you go there. I don't know how many of you have ever been there, but if you've never been there, the place is filled with sand and rocks. And you go, well, that sounds really stupid. I know a lot of people think that, but for guys, we get to go climb on stuff. And one of the things that we enjoy doing whenever we go is getting ourselves into tight places. I've got pictures, and of course I thought about it too late. But over the years, just being in some extremely tight spaces. Now, my son is more daring than I in those situations. I will get myself into some tight spaces, crawling in between rocks and climbing in between things and climbing over things. But he will purposely look for tight spaces. He doesn't like tight spaces, but he's like me, doesn't like it, so he'll go do it on purpose. And there have been some times where, hey, hey, Dad, come here, and I think this happened the last time we were there. And then he's like, hey, could you just push down on my shoulder while I try to get to... It's like, so you need me to push down on your shoulder in order for you to squeeze through a spot? I probably shouldn't be doing this, but okay, And let me squeeze you in there. Tight spots are not my favorite, but I'm not necessarily terrified of them either. But I just... when you're in Joshua Tree National Park, there are these boulders that are just bigger than your house. And if you get caught in between one of them, my practical mind, I'm thinking, if I get caught, how are they supposed to move this rock? So I'm not getting in there. That's just a little bit too tight for me. But those are times when I'm getting myself into tight spots. Now, serving God, there have been times when I've gotten into tight spots, and it's questionable as to whether it was me or whether it was God. Now, that may be a little bit of a surprise to you for me to say that God has gotten me into some tight spots, because we, for the most part, many of us, have this idea that God never puts us in bad positions or in dangerous positions. However, it does not take long as you begin to read the Bible to find out that, no, wait a minute, I think, in fact, God does at times put us in difficult, tight, or dangerous positions. This chapter 14, is one of my favorites, and I've got to be careful here that I not get so excited that I slow down and we don't get any further than the first few verses. But here's what we find in Exodus chapter 14. Two main divisions. The first one is camping, and the second one is crossing. So we're going to see the Israelites. They've left Egypt. They're now on the move, on the road. They're camping in a specific spot. And then the second part of this is the crossing. Let's get into the first section, which is on camping. Camping begins at verse 1, of course. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying... Here's what God spoke to Moses. Now, let me ask you a question, church. I know that you're still, trying to wake up. But verse 1, this is a quiz. You ready? It's a trick question. Are you ready? Are you ready?
Yes.
You're like, I'm not even ready for the ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
You don't want to answer because you're afraid I'm going to look at you and say, fine, what's the answer? Here's the question. Who is speaking to Moses? Yes, Jordan, with authority. Did you hear that? The Lord. Now the Lord spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses. It was the Lord that spoke to Moses. Okay? Not, and when we say Lord, we're talking about God, okay? We're not talking about Lord Vader, okay? We're talking about God. God spoke to Moses. Now, who is supposed to be in charge of this whole thing? I know that Moses is the human leader, but who's telling Moses what to do? Does anybody know? It's the Lord, right? God is telling Moses what to do. God's got it all orchestrated. God had a plan from the beginning. He worked, tried to give Pharaoh some chances. Pharaoh wasn't going for it. And each step of the way, God had a plan. Every step of the way. Now, let me ask you another trick question. You're not going to find it here, okay? So I'm just going to throw this out there. Does anything surprise God? What do you guys think? Does anything surprise God? Some of you are saying, no way, nothing surprises God. And you would be correct in saying that, no, nothing surprises God. God's aware of everything. God's got it all orchestrated. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God's got this whole thing, like as we go through Exodus, do you believe that God's got it all planned out? Yeah? He's probably not making it up, as he goes, although Moses and the children of Israel are finding out one step at a time. That's how faith works. Do what I tell you to do. Okay, bam. Okay, now do the next thing that I tell you to do. Okay, I'll do that. Okay? That's difficult for us. It's hard for us. Even dealing with our earthly parents. Where are we going? How long does it take to get there? What time are we going to get there? Are we going to stop to eat? What are we stopping for? How long are we stopping? What are we going to see on the way? We want to know the entire plan. And some of you may have some crazy parents who said, I'm not telling you where we're going, just get in the car, let's go. And then you start driving and they're just random. They just want to hey, we'll just come up with some stuff as we go. And then some of you may have parents that planned it all out. Well, God planned it all out. However, he does not reveal the entire thing. It's step by step. That's how faith works. So in verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses. God is speaking. The reason I am making such a big deal of that is because of this in verse 2. Speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. Now, I am going to show you a map in just a moment. In fact, let's go ahead and put this in here. The first, underneath camping, if I'm taking notes, I am going to actually write in closed in. That would be our first subpoint, closed in. Okay? Here's why. Now, you can go on Google and find lots of different maps. You can find maps of the Exodus. You can find maps of Jesus' ministry. You can find maps of Middle Earth. This one, I need you to understand, the map makers weren't there. So this slide this is one of the routes that we believe they took. Now, as you look up different maps, you're going to find different different maps. Some of them actually have the children of Israel starting out the land of Goshen and Ramses. You see that up there? Actually, oh, you know what? Actually, does this? Oh, look at this. Oh, it doesn't work on the screen. Some of the routes in the maps actually have the children of Israel leaving that area of Ramses and completely going around the Red Sea. Now, that's a lot of faith. Because if they went around the Red Sea, how in the world did they cross it? I don't know. That's pretty incredible. So anyways, this one gives us kind of a general idea. They're about to cross. They're at the Red Sea. You see where it says Pi Hahiroth? And there's a question mark because they're not exactly sure where exactly that was. But the children of Israel are down there. And what we read in verse 2, looking at that map. You look at the map, I'll read to you, okay? It'll be just like bedtime. Speak to the children of Israel. God is speaking to Moses, and he tells Moses, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp. So stop going in that direction, turn and go in this other direction. What direction? Before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol, where there was an Egyptian outpost, military outpost, and the sea. Opposite Baal Zephon, you shall camp before it by the sea. In other words, what God has just told Moses. He just told him this. He said, I want you to stop leading the children of Israel in the direction that you're going. And instead, I want you to turn, and I want you to set up camp between, camp before, notice, Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. Now, you may not be able you may not understand exactly what's going on in verse 2, and then from the map you may say, well, I don't really understand the point or why you're making it such a big deal. One thing that you might hang on to is that he wants them to camp before it by the sea. Okay? Now, this sea this is not something that they can just jump in boat. They don't have boats, so they can't just jump in boats and paddle across the sea. Kayaks, stand-up paddle boards. Like, everybody, all right, all 1 million of us, we've got these paddle boards, and we got the group rate, so everybody just jump on a paddle board and let's go. They don't have that. So there's a problem there with them being at the sea. That's one direction. The door is shut. You cannot go across the sea. Now, most of us, maybe all of us, know the story, what's about to happen. But do you understand that what God has just done is that he has put his own people in a bad position? That's the point that I'm trying to make here. They are closed in. Let's get to that next one. There it is. And they are closed in. They've got the Red Sea in front of them. And they're surrounded by these other cities, and nearby there are Egyptian military outposts. God has just purposely, remember verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, and then he says in verse 2, these are directions, precise directions. Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp. So stop going in the direction that you're leading them, and I want you to turn, and I want you to lead them to set up camp in this specific area. Okay? Now, in case there is any question in your mind as to them being closed in or in any kind of danger, look at verse 3. God, this is still God speaking. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel. Here's what Pharaoh is going to say. They are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. So see, Pharaoh would find out where the children of Israel are, and he would think this. He would think to himself, they're trapped. The land has confused them, and now they're camping before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal. They're camping by the sea. There's no way out. And indeed, he would be accurate in his assessment. However, they weren't bewildered by the land. God specifically led them there. Now, see, that may go against the grain for many of us. Wait a minute. I'm not sure. I don't think that God puts us in these dangerous positions. I don't think God does that. What are you talking about? Nobody just did it. He just did it. He's in the process of doing that as we're reading. Putting them in a daring or in a dangerous position. Now the question is, why would God do that? We're going to find out here in just a moment. But you and I first need to deal with that wait a minute, God put his people in a dangerous position? You think about Jesus. Jesus was born, and as he was born, the king was trying to hunt him down, and they had to flee to Egypt. Remember that part of the story? Christmas is coming up, my favorite holiday, because I get stuff that I don't deserve. I like it. Okay? Christmas, we celebrate the coming of Jesus, the birth of Jesus. But there's an aspect to that we always, when we teach the Christmas story, we kind of stop short. Because The king was hunting for Jesus, wanting to kill him, and killed all of the other baby boys in that area. We forget about that. Oh, man, that's part of the Christmas story. It is. Think about how many times Jesus, as he's serving the Father, gets into these somewhat tight spaces. Now, he's Jesus. Obviously he gets out of them. Think about Paul. I always think about when he was shipwrecked on the island of, was it Patmos? Patmos. But you think about, that's an exciting story that he's on the island shipwrecked, but what about the shipwreck itself? He's sailing, he's a prisoner. He's not out there like on some, carnival cruise. He's a prisoner of the Romans, and they get into this nasty storm. It's multiple days, and then finally he announces to everybody, because God gave him a little bit of info and said, listen, the entire ship is going to be lost, but we're going to survive. Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. Just the ship that we're in, because we're in the ocean and we're in a ship, we're going to lose the entire ship, but don't worry about it. We'll make it safe to shore. And it was God orchestrating his life and leading that man. And how many times did that happen? I've shared with you my story about when I was in the Philippines. I'm there for about 2 weeks. I'm serving the Lord. I'm teaching at lots of different places. We're doing outreaches. Lots of people being led to the Lord. And then as we're nearing the end of the trip, we get into these vehicles. I get into one of the vehicles, the tire blows, the whole thing flips over on its side, and we go skidding off the road, off into the the side of the road. And boom, stopped, and I thought the thing was going to rip my arm off, because I had my arm hanging out the window, and it just got yanked back, and I was like, I thought for sure that it was just going to rip my arm off at any moment. But I was there serving God. Why would God allow that to happen? And then I come out of that, I pull my arm out when we finally stop, and I look, and I've got a little cut there, tiny little cut, like maybe the length of a quarter, maybe. And I could not believe I was in the hospital doing this, and they're like, what are you doing? It's like, I just can't believe my arm is still on my body. This is incredible, and it still works. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm in shock. And at some moment, as I'm moving my arm, it's just going to fall off and fall on the floor or something. I could not believe it. But I'm there serving the Lord. Why would God allow that to happen? It's always for a reason. We're going to find out in just a moment. But for us, we need to deal with that fact, and it may be a hard thing for you and I to swallow right now, that God sometimes will put us in difficult positions. He will do that. Here's why. To teach you and I. Now, he's got a specific purpose here. We'll get into that in just a moment in the next verse. But for you and I, the believers, and even for the Israelites, the lesson is this: that I may not always be in a place of safety. However, God is my safety. That is the point for you and I. The tire on the vehicle may blow and we may flip, and it may be very dangerous. However, as we came out of that vehicle, out of the back of it, I think there were about 7 or 8 of us back there. As each of us came out, and some were bloody and cut up, but everybody came out. No one died. No one lost any body parts. Nobody was permanently damaged. We learned that day that, the world or this vehicle may be unsafe. You ever go to the Philippines, check the tires, okay? They like to drive on bald tires. I'm just saying, check the tires. But everything around us, the environment may be unsafe. However, God is our safety. Whenever you and I are traveling, I know that you've heard this before. If you've been saved for more than 5 minutes and you've gone somewhere, someone will pray for traveling mercies. And that's good. That's okay. It's a good thing. However, I want you to think back. Some of you have been reading the Bible. You've been hearing the Bible all of your life. I want you to think back real quickly. Just think about Bible stories. Did anyone in the service of God ever ask for safety? I'll wait. It's like, now that you mention it, I don't ever remember anybody praying for safety. Like, what is wrong with these people? Here's why. Because the people that you and I are reading about in the Bible have found something greater. They have discovered that God is their safety. So that wherever they might go, they, as they are in the middle of God's plan, in the middle of God's will, He is their safety. So that they did not have to ask for safety, as long as they were following God. As God leads you, you follow. He's your safety. That was the whole point with Abram back in Genesis chapter 12. Go from your kindred, from your family, and from your father's house. Leave your safety net and go to a land that I will show you. It's leave your safety net and come and find out that I am your safety, Abram. And the sooner that you and I as believers discover that, you know what, it doesn't matter where I go, God is my safety, the better off you and I will be, and the sooner we will be able to walk by faith without fear. It's tough, isn't it? You and I, we struggle with fear. We do. We struggle with fear. But the sooner that you and I learn, you know what, I'm in the middle of God's hand. He's got me. Can bad things happen? They absolutely can. Can dangerous things happen? They absolutely can. Can Christians get hurt? Absolutely. But it is not, when it happens in the life of a believer, it is not outside of the will of God. He's not surprised by that. It's something that He is orchestrating or He's using it. He may be allowing it for a reason. And so when you and I realize, wait a minute, God is my safety, then I am able to walk by faith without fear. So in verse 3, he already knows Pharaoh's going to say, hey, they're bewildered by the land, the wilderness has closed them in. Verse 4, then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. And I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. It's exactly what they did. So in other words, it gets even worse, because what we find out in verse 4 is that God was actually using the children of Israel. He put them into a dangerous position because He was setting a trap. I'm going to put them there because Pharaoh it's going to run through Pharaoh's mind that, now's my chance. Why did I let them go? And I'm going to go chase them down. And Pharaoh does just that. But you'll notice the words there in verse 4, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army. Some may trust in horses. Some may trust in chariots. But we will, trust. Is trust? We will trust in the name of the Lord. Anybody remember that song from Children's Ministry? Thank you very much, Matt. Yeah. All of you that didn't raise your hands and you were in Pastor Heath's Children's Ministry, I'm telling you, okay? Some may trust in horses, some may trust in chariots, but we will trust in the Lord. And Pharaoh and his army were trusting in horses and chariots. But he does this in verse 4. He wants the Egyptians to know, I am the Lord, he said. God, I know this sounds funny, but God is in the business of making Himself known. He's in the business of making Himself known. Now, we may go, God wants, I thought God was humble, and, why does He want to make Himself known? we who have these online shrines to ourselves, who post our selfies so that everybody knows who I am, we look at God and go, well, you're supposed to be humble. Why are you trying to make yourself known? He's making himself known to the Egyptians. And, although it's not said here, he obviously also wants to teach his own children, the children of Israel, who he is also. But his point in verse 4 is to make himself known. I mean, of all the people that you and I know that we should know better, it's God. And unless he reveals himself to us, we're not going to know who he is. So he wants to reveal himself in verse 4. He's going to gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, and the Egyptians will know that he is the Lord. Not Pharaoh, not the sun god, not any other god in Egypt, but God. Just God. And they did so. They fell for it. Verse 5, after they were closed in, look at this. Consumed with anger. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? Why did we let go of these slaves? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them. That's the children of Israel, overtook them by the sea beside Pi Hahiroth before Baal Zephon. So he is consumed with anger, and he goes chasing after the Israelites. Now, what about the Israelites? We turn our attention to them and see that they are consumed with fear. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Now, they're consumed with fear here, and it is going to produce some ugly things in them in just a moment. Probably familiar for many of us, if not all of us at different times. But I want you to think about this for just a moment before we go any further. You've got Pharaoh coming. The point was made that he's coming with all of his chariots, all of his captains, his entire army. What do the Israelites have? They've got nothing. They have no weapons. They did not leave with weapons. They left with their unleavened bread. What are you going to do with that? They've got nothing to defend themselves with. So, even further into the problem of them being in this bad spot, this tight space, this dangerous spot, on top of that, they've got no means of defending themselves. What are they going to do? Hurl unleavened bread and sheep at the Egyptians? What are they going to do? What do they have? They've got nothing. They are defenseless. Defenseless. And yet God put them in that spot. But they are about to learn a very valuable lesson. You know that. So in verse 10, so they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Now that sounds good at the end of verse 10. They cried out to the Lord. Well, that's what you want to do when you're afraid. You cry out to the Lord. And that is what you want to do. That's what I do when I'm afraid. Cry out to the Lord. He's the right one to cry out to. However, what exactly did they mean by crying out to the Lord? Verse 11, then they said to Moses. This gives us an idea of what they were possibly saying to God. Because we don't know exactly what they were saying to God, but we do know what they were saying to Moses. And they were speaking to Moses because he was representing God. Here's what they say in verse 11. Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? So immediately, at the first sign of danger, their faith in God and their faith in Moses as God's leader breaks down. Immediately their faith breaks down. I mean, goodness. Don't raise your hands, but does that feel like you maybe at times? Like, man, why do I do that? At the first sign of danger, as soon as something looks like it might, there's the remote chance of something going wrong. Like, why do I freak out so quickly? Why don't I just, hold fast? Why don't I just hold on to my faith and stay strong? Why does my faith always crumble? Why is it always shaky? Well, listen, you're in good company. The children of Israel did the same thing. So we cannot look at them and go, dude, what are you complaining about? Man, he saved you from Egypt. No, we can understand this. The possibility of danger. And some of us begin, our faith begins to shake, begins to quiver. But God is in the process of calming his people down, and so he is in the process of calming you down also. And the way that he does that is not to pat your back and say, well, hey, listen, just, come on, think some good thoughts. And, let's just, kind of calm ourselves down, do some breathing exercises. God doesn't do that. Instead, what he does in order to calm his people down is he's going to show who he is. Because that's what we need to know. That's what we need to see. That's what's going to bring peace to us, to our minds, and to our hearts when we are fearful. Is remembering, wait a minute. God and his abilities. So let's continue to read. So it says, in verse 11, they begin to complain. As they're consumed with fear, they begin to attack Moses. Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. They were so fearful in that moment that they said it would have been better for us to just remain slaves for the rest of our lives than to come out here and die in the wilderness. That's how terrified they were. You and I are somewhat familiar with that because we live in the United States, and we, as part of our history, there was slavery that was part of our history. And we've heard the different stories about slaves and escaping, and how there were many slaves that had the opportunity to escape and never did because they were afraid to leave. Or many that escaped, then on the road were faced with some danger, and out of fear returned back to their owners, to their master, and then were disciplined or even killed for even leaving in the first place. And so this is not a huge mystery to us that this group would say, man, why did you even rescue us from Egypt? You should have just left us alone. We could have just stayed there and we were happy being slaves. No, you were not. Nobody's happy being a slave. And yet in this moment, because of the fear. I mean, have you ever experienced that? Maybe your family, everything's going good, and then at the first sign of fear, maybe people start to turn on one another. I saw that recently. I saw that just recently, like over the weekend with a family, where something was going on. One of the family members ended up in the hospital, and the other family members began to get angry at one another over certain details of that. Being a pastor, I've seen that many times. I remember sitting in the living room of one of my former students. He was riding his bike and a bicycle and got hit. He got run over by a semi and killed up the road from his house. And I had to go to their house to sit in their living room to try to be some source of comfort. You cannot comfort anybody in that position. There's nothing you could do or say. You just sit there and you weep with them. But I remember being in there, and as family members began to argue with one another, as family members began to yell at one another, as family members began to cuss at this young man's mom, at his parents, as she began to yell back, as accusations started to go back and forth, and having to stand up and say, knock it off. It's like you go into dad mode with these adults. Like, hey! Sorry about that, Nick. What are you doing? Knock it off. come here for this? Boom! But inside it's like, I hope they don't all join in and beat me up. But I've seen it. I have seen that happen. Fear can stir up things in us that cause us to even attack one another. And all of these people were all excited, like, woo, road trip, we're going to go camping, we're leaving Egypt, everything is fantastic, woo, we're going to camp by the sea, I love to camp by the sea. And then all of a sudden it's, we hate you, Moses, why did you bring us here? What is going on? People sometimes, they like turn demonic when they get scared, like, I hate you. Like, what is wrong with you? Fear. Fear can be so very powerful because at this point, the Israelites don't yet fully understand their God. They do not fully understand who they belong to. When you figure out your identity, who you belong to, then your heart becomes settled. Yes or no? Yes. When you know that you can trust your dad to catch you, you would jump off of anything if you know he's going to be there for you. You would jump off the roof into his arms if he said, jump off the roof. But it's 3 stories. I know, just come on, I got you. We would do anything that our fathers told us to do if we knew that we could trust them. If we knew that this man loves me beyond the shadow of doubt, in fact, I think he loves me more than he loves himself, then we're willing to go anywhere, do anything. The Israelites don't understand that yet. God is getting them there, slowly but surely. So they're yelling at Moses because they're consumed with fear. They said in verse 12, why didn't you just leave us there? We told you in Egypt, let us alone. And in verse 13, and Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Why would you tell me that? I am afraid. And now you're just going to tell me don't be afraid? But listen, he's got a reason. Here it is. Here's the secret. You go, man, when I'm afraid and someone tells me not to be afraid, I'm done. I don't even want to talk to you. But look at this. He gives them a reason not to fear. Verse 13. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Knock it off. And then he says this. This is absurd. Stand still. Don't run. Don't look for a way out. Don't try to come up with some scheme on your own. He actually tells them, do not be afraid, number 1. Secondly, stand still. Because can you imagine? I mean, what do you do when you're afraid? Some of you, that leg starts to like, right? Some of you get afraid and your voice gets shaky. How many of you are like that? Like, yeah, I get afraid and, we can tell, right? That happens to me too. And he says, stand still. Why should we not be afraid? Number 1. Number 2, why in the world should we stand still? And Moses says, I'm glad you asked, because in verse 13, do not be afraid, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord. And he will accomplish which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. Forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. This is it. This is the valley of decision right here. You're at the crossroads. You're afraid. You're fearing for your own life. What are you going to do? And Moses, like a good leader, like a good father, like a good friend, when he sees that the people are in fear, he tells them this: do not be afraid. Why not? Stand still. Why in the world would I do that? And he gets their attention directed on the Lord. You see, I have brought it up, I think in the last 2 weeks, I brought it up twice already, and here it is again. I think that God is wanting to speak to Fusion to remind us of this. I've told you this, I'll say it again because some of you have not heard it. Most of you have, but some of you have not over the last couple of weeks. I know that there are much funner youth groups than Fusion. I know that. It's like, why do we only worship? Why do we only study? Why don't we ever do anything fun? This is why. Because in the time of testing for you and I, fun is not going to get us through that. Fun is not going to strengthen my faith. Fun is not going to keep my heart steady. What's going to keep my heart steady? Remembering that God created the universe. That he can blast open the ocean with the breath from his nostrils. That he can save defenseless Israelites from a powerful Egyptian army. When I'm afraid and I'm in that time of testing, when everything around me is crashing down, when I have found myself in the midst of a mess, in the midst of a storm, in an unsafe environment, to remember that God is my safety, that is what will keep my faith established. And so what do we do at Fusion? We focus on, it's easy, it's two-part, worship and God's Word. It's worshiping God for who he is, and then getting into his Word to learn more about him, because that's what I need for my life. So when you and I are afraid, what we do is, let me go back to God. Where is God at? And who is God? And what can God do? Now, surely, we don't have an army of people in here, but there's enough of you that there are at least one of us, probably many of us, that are going through a fearful situation right now. It might be with family. Maybe you're looking at mom and dad, and they're arguing, or they're not getting along, and they're talking about divorce. Maybe they're already separated, and you're fearful. Maybe you're facing some kind of medical news, like mom or dad, or maybe grandma or grandpa, somebody's going to the doctor and they're having tests run because, something's not right. And then you're in the midst of finding out that somebody that you love has got some kind of disease, some kind of cancer, some kind of sickness. And maybe your heart, your faith is beginning to waver. What do you need? Do you need you just need a fast-paced game of tic-tac-toe. That'll make you feel better. It's just warm and fuzzy inside. Is that what you need? No. What you need to remember is, wait a minute, but what about God? Who's God? What can God do? Where is he at? Is he here? Is he my safety? When you remember those things, then your heart can be filled with faith, void of fear. But listen, if you're not there, if you're feeling like, man, I'm always afraid, listen, be patient. God is still working. He loves you. He's trying to teach you. But to go back to that place, that's right, God. And man, I love these words so much. And Moses said to the people in verse 13, do not be afraid. Stand still. See the salvation of the Lord. So you got a front row seat, Israelites. Just stop. Settle down and watch what God does, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, these oppressors, these slave owners, these people who have mistreated you for 430 years, they've held your people captive. You will never again see them forever. Because in verse 14, if you have not memorized this, just put that down on your list to memorize. It's easy. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. The Lord will fight for you. I thought that God was like this old man in a long white robe with a long white beard, and he's just so gentle, and he's nice, and he's sweet, and he's kind, and he doesn't hurt even, a mosquito. And then I come to verse 14 of Exodus chapter 10, and it says right there that the Lord will fight. Wait, God fights? He's about to. We're going to see it. We'll see it next time. This is where we're going to stop. But you need to know this morning that if you belong to God, God fights for you. He's on your side. He fights for your behalf. Fights on your behalf. Whatever it is that you are struggling with this morning, Fusion, whatever kind of fear you got going on in your heart, it would be wrong, it would be sinful for me to belittle you for that. Like, just what are you fearing about? Just come on and just place your faith in the Lord. What are you doing? No, that's not my place. I've got things that I'm afraid of. You've got things that you're afraid of, and God is in the process of teaching each of us at different times, at different levels, in different ways, how to trust Him. So if you're fearful this morning, I would encourage you, I'd point you back to God and say, hey, listen, I know that you're afraid, but get your eyes on God. How do I do that? Right? Because when I get fearful, I get chaotic, and I'm just a hot mess. I don't know which way I'm going. Well, what you do is stand still, see the salvation of the Lord. Get your nose in your Bible in those moments. Like, stop running around. Take a look at God's salvation. And once we get our noses in those Bibles, go, oh, that's right. And then God, once He's got your attention, He has the opportunity to calm your heart, to bring peace to your mind. And all the rest of the world will be going nuts, and you'll be laying down and just take a nice peaceful nap. Because, hey, man, I know I'm in the middle of God's palm. God fights for us. I love it. I don't like to fight. I've never been a fighter. I don't like to fight. God fights for me. Hold your peace. Father, I want to pray.